Eric just wanted to make it home, but of course life had other plans. On an empty street, he was cornered by three bikers, convinced the kid with a backpack wouldn't fight back. They thought they were the hunters, but little did they know who would really become the prey that night. Now, here's how it all went down. Eric Johnson, a 17-year-old black teen, walked home under the dim glow of the streetlights in suburban Detroit. For Eric, boxing wasn't just a sport, it was a lifeline. It was the way he channeled his anger and grief after losing his father, a tragedy that left a permanent scar on his heart. His coach, Mr. Reed, had become his anchor, a mentor who pushed him not just to fight, but to rise above. The evening air was heavy, the kind that seemed to press down on you. Eric carried his worn-out backpack loaded with books, his trusty hand wraps, and a bottle of water. As he walked, the hum of motorcycle engines broke through his thoughts. It started faint, but it grew louder, sharper, until it filled the air around him. Before Eric could process, three bulky men on roaring motorcycles screeched to a stop in front of him. Their leather jackets bore the emblem of Hell's Fangs, a name that reeked of trouble. The men swung their legs off their bikes and blocked the narrow street, each one sizing him up like a pack of wolves around a lone deer. "Hey, kid," one of them sneered, his voice thick and gravelly, like he'd been smoking since birth. A skull tattoo stretched across his neck, pulsing with every word. "What's that trash you're hauling around?" Eric's eyes narrowed, his pulse steady despite the rising tension. His instincts screamed at him to stay calm. "Just heading home," he replied evenly, his voice low but firm. "Home?" another one mocked, his tone laced with disdain. This guy was shorter but wiry, with a smirk that screamed trouble. "You think you're taking a Sunday stroll, boy? Let's see what you've got in that bag." Eric tightened his grip on the strap of his backpack. His silence only seemed to agitate them. Their laughter echoed down the empty street, a taunt that prickled the back of Eric's neck. "You can hand it over," the third biker said, his voice colder than the night air. He pulled a heavy chain from under his jacket, letting it dangle menacingly. "Or we'll take it ourselves." Eric's heart thudded in his chest, but he didn't flinch. Years of training had taught him the importance of composure. He took a small step back, his eyes scanning the street for an escape. But the bikes formed a wall of chrome and leather, leaving no room for a way out. His mind raced. He could feel the adrenaline starting to course through his veins, sharpening his focus. The bikers moved closer, their boots crunching against the asphalt. "Don't make us ask again," Skull Tattoo snarled, stepping into Eric's personal space. Eric didn't answer. He simply shifted his weight, readying himself. What came next would depend entirely on their next move. "You deaf or what?" the biker with the chain bellowed, stepping forward with a mean look in his eyes. His hand snapped the chain in a wide arc, the metallic clatter echoing off the buildings. Eric shifted his weight instinctively, his years of training kicking in like muscle memory. The chain whipped past him, slamming into the asphalt with a heavy thud that sent sparks flying. "Think you're some kind of hero, huh, kid?" growled the tattooed biker, his voice dripping with venom. The man lunged at Eric with both arms, trying to grab hold of him. But Eric wasn't the easy target they thought he was. His movements were sharp, calculated. Years of boxing and self-defense training had honed his reflexes to razor precision. He sidestepped the man's charge with a quick pivot, and in one swift motion, Eric delivered a precise kick to the biker's knee. A sickening pop echoed as the man stumbled, pain etched across his face. Eric followed up with a devastating uppercut, his knuckles slamming into the biker's jaw with a force that would make any coach proud. The man crumpled to the ground like a bag of bricks, out cold before his head hit the pavement. "Is this a joke to you?" roared the second biker, a wiry guy who clearly thought he was faster than he was. He charged at Eric, fists swinging wildly. Eric ducked under a clumsy haymaker, closing the gap between them in a heartbeat. Using one of his favorite combos from training, he drove his elbow into the biker's solar plexus with surgical precision. The man gasped, his knees buckling. Before he could recover, Eric grabbed his arm, shifted his weight, and flipped him clean over his shoulder. The biker hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him. By now, the remaining biker, the one with the chain, stood frozen, his expression a mix of disbelief and anger. His grip on the chain tightened as he began swinging it in wide circles, the metal whistling ominously through the air. "All right, kid, you've had your fun," he hissed, inching closer. His voice was low, almost snake-like. "But playtime's over now, you're mine." Eric stayed rooted in place, his eyes locked on the man's every movement. He could feel the tension building, like a coiled spring ready to snap. He wasn't going to make the first move, he didn't have to. The sound of distant sirens suddenly cut through the air, growing louder by the second. The chain-wielding biker faltered for just a moment, his head whipping around toward the flashing lights approaching from down the street. A police cruiser rolled to a stop nearby, its spotlight casting an eerie glow over the scene. An officer stepped out, his hand resting on his belt as he surveyed the situation. "What's going on here?" the cop demanded, his voice authoritative but cautious as he looked from Eric to the bikers sprawled on the ground. The biker with the chain wasted no time, his demeanor shifting like a flip of a switch. "Officer, thank God you're here," he exclaimed, his voice dripping with fake relief. "This kid, he attacked us out of nowhere. We were just minding our business and he went crazy." Eric clenched his fists at his sides, his jaw tightening. He could feel the familiar weight of frustration settling in his chest. He knew all too well how this could go, how the odds were rarely in his favor in situations like this. The officer's eyes narrowed as he looked at Eric, then back at the biker, his expression unreadable. The sirens had stopped, but the tension on the street was far from over. The officer moved toward Eric, his gaze sharp and calculating. His boots crunched against the pavement as he stopped just a step too close, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. "Is it true?" the cop barked, his tone demanding, his eyes narrowing as if trying to peel back the layers of Eric's composure. Eric took a deep breath, his mind racing for the right words. But before he could say anything, something caught his attention, a subtle movement in the corner of his vision. One of the bikers, the tattooed one sprawled on the ground, was inching his hand toward the handle of a knife tucked into his belt. "Behind you!" Eric shouted, pointing urgently at the biker. The officer spun on his heel, his training kicking in. His hand flew to his gun, drawing it in one fluid motion. "Hands up now!" the cop barked, his voice cutting through the tense silence like a knife. The biker froze, his hand hovering inches from the weapon. The officer moved quickly, kicking the knife away and cuffing the man's wrists with practiced efficiency. "Nice try," the cop muttered, hauling the biker to his feet. By the time the second patrol car arrived, flashing red and blue lights painted the street in surreal patterns. A small crowd began to gather, neighbors stepping out of their homes drawn by the commotion. Among them was a middle-aged woman with a smartphone clutched tightly in her hands. "I got it all," she declared, her voice steady as she approached the officer. "They surrounded the boy first. I started recording when they got off their bikes. Here." She held out the phone, and the officer took it, his brows furrowing as he watched the footage. The video told the story clearly. Eric, standing calmly as the bikers cornered him, their threatening postures, and finally the moment when the fight broke out. The officer looked up, his expression softening slightly as he turned back to Eric. "Looks like you've had a rough night," he said, his tone more measured now. "Stay here for a moment." Eric stayed silent, his body tense, watching as the police began rounding up the bikers. The men were handcuffed and led to the patrol cars, their faces a mixture of anger and humiliation. The biker with the chain shot Eric a venomous glare, but Eric didn't flinch. He stood tall, his hands steady, his breathing even. "You're a hero, kid," the woman with the phone said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "If you hadn't stood your ground—" She trailed off, shaking her head. The words hit Eric like a wave. Hero? That wasn't how he saw himself. He wasn't trying to be brave or noble. He was just surviving. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a target. He felt seen. As the police cars drove off, taking the bikers with them, the crowd began to disperse. Eric stood in the middle of the street, the cool night air wrapping around him. He felt a strange emptiness, like the adrenaline had left a hollow space in its wake. But beneath that was something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. "Hey, kid," the officer called out from the driver's seat of the last patrol car. Eric turned to look at him. "You did good tonight," the cop said simply. tipping his hat before driving away. Eric watched the car disappear into the distance. For the first time, the street didn't feel so lonely. And for the first time, he didn't feel small. He felt like he mattered. What would you have done in Eric's place? Do you think he handled it the right way? Share your thoughts, experiences, or if someone you know has faced something similar. Don't forget to like, comment, and let us know how you feel about the story. This story was created to raise awareness and shine a light on important social issues. It's not just about the fight. It's about making the world a better and more just place. Your voice matters, and together, we can inspire change.